Hi, folks. Philippi said should introduce me, and I think you all know who I am, so we can dispense with the introductions, as we say. And thank you so much for coming, and I want to thank the adjunct faculty in particular for coming, because I know we have so little real call on your time, and it's a real sign of your dedication to the college and your integration with the college that you're here. I wanted to set the stage for this afternoon's discussion by talking a little bit giving a little bit of an overview of purpose-centered education and where it came from and its historical relationship to our programs, and then talk a little bit about what I see as some of the challenges that have come about as a result of thinking hard about the application of purpose-centered education to the business programs. First of all, I want to introduce two very valuable resources we have here for the discussion, and these are board members Deborah Allen and Tom Weber. And Deborah Allen was involved in the putting together of purpose-centered education as an organized system in the mid-1970s, and then working as an administrator at the college through about 2000, Deborah? Mm-hmm. Through 2000. So having seen both the initiation of purpose-centered education as a formal system and build upon an earlier informal system which certainly had major components of what became purpose-centered education, and then having as a high-level administrator of the college an overview of the unfolding of that system over the period when it was created in the mid-70s to as an active administrator till 2000, and as somebody involved with the college until now. Tom Weber had a different experience. He came here in the late 1970s and was one of the first faculty members in
early 1970s.
Early 1970s, one of the first faculty members in the unfolding of purpose-centered education in its organized and modern form. And how many years were you here, Tom?
Four.
Okay. And was an faculty member in purpose-centered education, but left shortly before purpose-centered education began to extend areas beyond human services. So at any rate, let me say a few words about purpose-centered education. And I think you can look at it as one of three major aspects of the college. And as we think about our college, it's centered and focused on and defined by purpose-centered education as an educational philosophy and method. There are two other things I think you can look at as major defining characteristics of our college. One, and this is extremely important historically, is who we serve. And as you all know, we have concentrated from the beginning on giving major service to economically disadvantaged people. And in fact, from 1966, when we first enrolled students as the Women's Talent Corps, until 1980, in order to enroll in the college, you had to be an economically disadvantaged person, because we existed with the support of federal government grants, and to qualify for support under those grants in the days when we didn't charge tuition and paid our students, you had to meet certain income levels. You had to be under certain maximum income levels. And so that has gone on in other forms, but serving the economically disadvantaged has been important. And of course, very large numbers of those historically have been women. At the beginning, it was all women. And again, large numbers of those folks historically have been from ethnic minority communities, which have historically either been underserved or poorly served by the general system of higher education. And then lastly, we also have historically served predominantly adult students and working adult students. So you have the first two characteristics of college, the philosophy and method of purpose-centered education. Secondly, a pretty well-defined historical core group that we've served as students. And then thirdly, I think there's another major aspect of our college, which is extremely important in a practical sense, and that is we built the college, these are not disconnected from the first two, and particularly from the second, but we built the college around certain kinds of convenience for these working adult, minority, often economically challenged students who've been the core of the people we've served. And the kinds of convenience we've offered have included weekend and evening programming, year-round education, branches, serving people at more than one place is another way of serving these populations, and our return to the Bronx last week was a recommitment to that kind of extra service. And now I think we will find as we go forward, and this is really a new thing in the development of the college, that distance education will become part of the hallmark of our convenience of service to students. So you have a college which is historically defined by purpose-centered education, method and philosophy, by a core group of students who it served, and then by a commitment to certain kinds of convenience, recognizing the nature of the lives of these students. Now, in terms of purpose-centered education, I think as we go into this discussion this afternoon, it's important to understand the circumstances in which it grew up. And the circumstance in which it grew up was in the early to mid-1970s. The college still had essentially a single academic program, that is the Human Services program. We were chartered in 1970 to offer associate degrees. Purpose-centered education was designed as we were working to move to become a bachelor's degree institution. And in fact, the intention originally at that time was to become simultaneously a bachelor's degree and master's degree institution. And the hope was to originally design a master's program which you could enter without necessarily having a bachelor's degree, or would get a bachelor's degree along the way. And the state of New York eventually didn't approve that, and we got to our master's programs through another route. But purpose-centered education was originally devised in a circumstance in which we were transitioning to a bachelor's degree program from an associate degree program in the Human Services, and was developed around the Human Services program and in the context of students working at human service, social service agencies. And the original model, correct me if I've got this wrong in detail, was that students would work 3 days a week at a social service agency, go to school 2 days a week, and they were paid in this capacity through the college, through the various sorts of federal grants that the college got. Originally, historically, the first grants were from the OEO, which was the bureaucratic manifestation of the war on poverty, then big grants through the Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, and finally at the end through CETA money, the Comprehensive Education and Training Act, which provided pay for individuals who were in some sense or another training for jobs. That all came to an end in 1980 with the election of Mr. Reagan and the turnover of Congress to the Republicans. Now, in that context, the students we originally served and for whom we developed PCE were working in almost entirely in either government agencies or in nonprofit agencies, many of those nonprofit agencies dependent for their existence on government contracts. And that was the world in which it operated, and in which the original details of application of constructive action as a process, for example, were developed. Starting in 1982, the college moved into offering programs in business. This was a major departure. It was the first time we'd offered anything outside human services. And in mid-1980s, we developed a master's degree in human services, which I think was really a fulfillment of our original intention in the 70s to develop a master's degree, and we've subsequently developed other programs. Some of those programs have proven to be easily amenable to the original model we developed for purpose-centered education. In particular, the Master's in Public Administration, which was originally a Master's in Human Services, had students who were operating in the same environment, in the environment of public and nonprofit agencies. And it was a pretty easy and straightforward extension of the method. That also proved to be true later in our Master's in Education program, although that came along quite a bit later. And that program also, not coincidentally, operates within the realm of public agencies, namely the public school system. And again, it's proven to be a fairly easy, straightforward application of the original ideas and method to another academic area. An area that's proven, I think, more difficult and problematic has been the application of purpose-centered education to the business programs. And I think the reasons for that aren't hard to find. And that is because the milieu of business is a very different milieu than the milieu of nonprofit agencies and government agencies. And there's some major differences in organization. One of them is that private businesses, unlike government agencies and nonprofit agencies, are in intense competition with one another or with other business organizations. One consequence of that is you have much more emphasis on secrecy, on hierarchy and control within those organizations, and probably a different culture that's grown up as a result of that. There are different values in business organizations. Typically, the leading values are maximizing profit for an owner or maximizing value for shareholders, quite different from the kind of communal or public interest which are actually, or at least ostensibly, at the core of the mission of nonprofit and government organizations. So this has really led our program into a different place, and it has, I think, led to issues and challenges in the application of purpose-centered education that deserve a lot more thought and consideration. Now here's some issues that grow out of that, and again, this is from my point of view, and everybody else will have their say on this, and that is that over time, and I don't know, and we don't have good historical records on to what degree this was true at one time or another, but at least over time, we've come to have a circumstance in which, unlike human services and the MPA program and the MS in education, there is either little or no field placement, field experience, supervised field experience for business students. And in that sense, you lack a major parallel to the human services program, for example, where for 7 of the 8 semesters, there is a requirement and expectation for a supervised field placement. That's a big difference. We grappled with that in our recent development of the MBA curriculum, and we at least in principle now have developed 3 alternative kinds of, quote, field experience that a person might have in that program. One is by using as a field site their current job. Another is by doing an internship in an organization where they don't hold their present job. And the third is through a mentorship with an external person who is in some sense or another deeply involved in the sector or industry in which the student has an interest. We haven't gone through the same process of trying to identify exactly what we can or should do at the undergraduate level in the business programs. And I'm just going to throw out some questions here that I think go directly back to the question of the constructive action process in the context of business programs. And that is it possible to do a constructive action in the original sense of purpose-centered education without a field setting? Is this possible at all? Secondly, is it possible to do a constructive action without an engaged field supervisor? Because we could imagine, I suppose, field settings in which there's not a field supervisor. That raises another set of questions. And finally, and this came home to me last week, and I'm just going to give you one little anecdote, home to me. Is it possible to carry out, even in these situations, in a field situation, in a private business setting, a constructive action, or is it likely to be easy to carry out a constructive action in which you take the classical first step, which is identifying a problem in the organization and setting out to solve it? And here's my anecdote for the week. Week before last, I and the chairman of the board, through a contact of his, went to meet with a woman who does human resources for a major media organization in Midtown. And one of her jobs is finding and placing people in internships. And we were sitting in the office, and both the chairman, Chuck Armstrong, and I were describing the constructive action process, and I started out by talking about the student identifies a problem, etc. And the woman there cut me off, not abruptly, but just said, well, we're not looking for people to identify problems. We want internships, and we know what we want. We need interns. We know what we want them to do, and so we're going to expect that they come here and don't look for a problem that we might or might not want to solve, but do what we want them to do in this internship. I think that's the reality of the situation in a lot of organizations. And frankly, by the way, because I don't want to say these are starkly different, there are issues that arise in nonprofit and government organizations in terms of going in and saying, well, I'm going to identify problems. Not every supervisor wants to be told that there are problems in their unit. This is an issue that's not unique to business organizations. So with that's my setting of the, at least one of the kinds or one of the realms of issues that I think are worthy of discussion this afternoon, because what we're trying to do is get to the point, and this is something we want to get to in our strategic plan, where in some sense or another we have a common application of purpose-centered education, all of our degree programs, and some elements to the application of purpose-centered education, including constructive action, that we can describe as applying to all or all of a subset of our degree programs, and do this in a systematic and organized way that both makes it easier for us to describe ourselves to the outside world and gives our students a more consistent and uniform experience, and helps us understand what outcomes we're looking for in our educational process, because that's what assessment is all about, and we want to ultimately do assessment well. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Trustee Deborah Allen.
Well, good. I am going to now turn it over to Tom Weber.
I'm next on the agenda, right? Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a little more background on myself so you know who I am and where I'm coming from in the talk. Sorry about that. Although I'm not a business person, I have a PhD in education from Columbia. And I did run a school for 15 years that employed 260 people. I consider that a business. We had a multi-million-dollar budget. I had to meet deadlines, do contracts, business plans, strategic plans, etc. I worked for 5 years as a for-profit consulting firm. That was some business experience. But I don't consider myself to be an expert in business. So what I'm going to do today is tell you what I consider the ideal or the true model of purpose-centered education as it was created in the beginning, and then leave it up to you folks to answer the questions that President Thompson sort of presented to you, and that is, how close can the business program come to this ideal? Do we want to come close to it? Are there aspects that we're not really interested in? I have three major points that I want to make about the purpose-centered education. Before I do so, however, I want to just give you a little background of what it was like. I came here in 1972 4 of us were hired to be the first faculty members to implement purpose-centered education. We were handed, the college had closed for about a year and gone into a think tank mode to create purpose-centered education. By the end of that year, we had come up with 8 purposes, which were sort of overarching competencies that we called them in those days, that we believed every human service worker should learn, and 5 generic dimensions that cut across all those competencies. Deborah's going to tell you a lot more about dimensions, I believe, later. But my point is that in 1972, there were 4 of us, just 4 of us. We were handed 8 purposes, 5 dimensions, and the idea that everything we taught in the classroom, Audrey Cohen made this very clear to us, everything that we taught in the classroom had to be demonstrated and performed in a fieldwork situation, and had to be done through what was called a constructive action. So there we were with 8 competencies, purposes, 5 dimensions cutting across all purposes, 4 of us and some people with Deborah, some support people, sitting down and saying, okay, what are we going to do? What's the content? What are we going to actually teach? How's it going to work? And we sat there and decided that we were going to be truly interdisciplinary. We drew on all of the social services: psychology, anthropology, sociology, education, organizational theory. And we were always motivated by the idea of how is each purpose going to make effective human service practitioners in the field, and how is each of our dimension classes going to fit into that purpose, that given purpose. We also were dedicated to the idea that each purpose should grow on itself. That is, that they should become deeper and more complex as you went through the program. So that when you got to purpose 2, you would reflect on purpose 1. When you got to purpose 6, you would already have purposes 1 through 5 under your belt. And it wasn't just new people teaching unconnected subject matter. In education, we call that scaffolding. I should say that I'm currently on the faculty at Hunter College. That's one of the big new words in education, scaffolding. We want to scaffold from kindergarten through 12th grade. We don't want to scaffold, and it means make sure that each year, as a student progresses through a program, that all of the professors are cognizant of what has been taught to them before and can draw on that information as they teach the classes. So there they were, 4 of us. The next thing we decided was that we would spend 2 days in the field supervising and meeting with students and field supervisors, 2 days in the field teaching, and 1 day at the college meeting together to plan the curriculum. So we were full-time teachers. We taught four classes every day, Monday and Tuesday. Some of us taught Thursday and Friday. We all met on Wednesday. And the other 2 days a week, I had 25 fieldwork students that I went into the field and observed them working. I provided feedback to them, and I provided training to their field supervisors, and met with their field supervisors about how they were performing in the field, the work they were doing, and how to make them more effective to workers. So this was a very different model than we have now. It was very tied to the field. And this sort of brings me to the 3 points I want to make this afternoon, sorry. The first point that I want to make is that the college model has to be seen as an integrated whole. It needs to be cohesive, it needs to fit together. The dimensions, the purposes, and the constructive action can't stand alone. They're like 3 legs on a 3-legged stool. They all have to intermesh with each other. You cannot teach a dimension class effectively if you don't understand what's happening in the purpose class. You can't teach a dimension class effectively if you don't understand what's happening in the other 4 dimension classes. And you can't teach in a dimension class effectively unless you understand the kind of constructive actions that your students are doing, so that your dimension classes can affect that. It is my feeling that this paradigm of education, this the dimensions, the purpose, and the constructive action, can be used to analyze events. It can be used to analyze organizations. They can be used to analyze business plans. They can be used to figure out how to both set up a business and how to analyze how to improve a business. I wanted to correct a little something that President Thompson said, and that is, my understanding of a constructive action is not necessarily that you identify problems. You identify ways of, maybe it is a problem, but it's a different way of saying a problem. You identify ways that an organization can be improved. Everybody understands that organizations can be improved. And maybe if you put it that way, field supervisors are less likely to be upset when you say, look, all I am is an employee here with an idea of how we can do our business better. It's not necessarily a problem, it's an idea for improvement. I believe that our model of dimensions, purposes, and constructive actions give an overall framework, a theoretical way of looking at it. In the Human Services program, Dr. Griffin, I don't know if any of you know him, even uses the purposes and the dimensions, especially the dimensions, to analyze plays and novels. It's a theoretical concept. And I've used it in my own business to make sure that I'm not forgetting certain aspects of what a business needs to do. So to me, it's very powerful. And when done properly, when done cohesively, when all the three parts are working together, it is a very powerful way of educating folks. That said, it also needs to be tied to performance. Performance is at the very heart of the program that we created in the early 70s, and it's the very heart of the ideal purpose-centered education. Without performance in the field, you don't have purpose-centered education. All of the knowledge, all of the theories, all of the skills we're learning in class are supposed to be demonstrated, or the students are supposed to be able to learn how to demonstrate them in the field. As somebody once said when we were doing this, you can't learn to drive a car without going out and driving a car. You can't learn to run a business without having some experience running a business. You can't learn to teach without having some experience in front of teachers teaching. And this is a basic concept of purpose-centered education as we created it. In fact, at the beginning, I have to tell you, we called it performance-based education. We didn't call it purpose-centered education, we called it performance-based education. And that was the lens through which we judged our classroom. Is this skill, is this a theory, is this knowledge that will help our students become more effective human service workers in the field, in real jobs, in the real world? So that's the second. The first point I wanted to make was it's a unified whole. The dimensions, the purposes, and the constructive action has to be seen as a unified whole. You can't teach them unconnected to each other. The second is that it's very definitely and deeply rooted in performance and the ability to perform skills and theory. And the third point I want to make is that at the heart of the college's mission, at the heart of purpose-centered education, is this whole notion of empowerment. College took very seriously the idea that the whole purpose of the college was to empower our students so that they could take control of their own lives, their own futures, and their own careers. To provide them with the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, the attitudes that would allow them to become truly empowered people. And that through their empowerment, they would empower the people with whom they worked, the organizations they worked in, and the communities they lived in, and through that process, change the world. At the beginning, we were very unabashedly proud of the fact that we were empowering people, and that through that empowerment, we expected to change the world. I submit to you that even in a business program, or especially in a business program in a place like the Metropolitan College in New York, that we are just not a regular business program. We should be a business program that takes seriously the basic values of empowering folks so that we run not just ethical businesses, but that we run businesses that take seriously creating sound products that care for their employees and create products and processes in which the business carefully looks at and studies issues of the environment. And that those are the kinds of business people that we want to create, and that's the kind of business program that the college, based on our history, based on our philosophy, based on our core values, should be creating. In a democracy, I believe that businesses, just as much as schools, social work agencies, should be involved in this whole process of making this world, this democracy, a fairer, more just place to live. We used to think about the core value of the college not just being empowerment, but being social action, social justice. I don't hear that talked about as much anymore, but I believe that it can be infiltrated into the business program as much into any of the other programs. In fact, in this day and age, maybe more needed in business than anywhere else in our American society. So that's my little speech. I know that this is creating issues for you to think about and talk about. But again, the design is a unified whole. All those three pieces have to fit together and work together. It has to be absolutely rooted in performance. And the business program is going to have to struggle how to get more performance and performance-based measures into the program. And the third is to really think about, do we believe in empowerment in the business program? And if so, what kind of empowerment, in what ways? How are we going to make sure that our students are becoming business people that truly make this world a fairer, more just place in which to live? Thank you. I guess I'm turning it over now to my colleague, Deborah.
I think I should have taken the opportunity to go before Tom. I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about the history of purpose-centered education as opposed to the history of the college. And I want to talk about purpose-centered education as a system. And this will be a slightly more technical view of some of what Tom has talked about. I want to start by pointing out that Audrey Cohen was a very successful and creative social entrepreneur. The precursor of our college was the Women's Talent Corps, which Audrey founded in 1964. It was actually the third organization that she had founded in order to solve particular social problems. By 1970, she worked very hard at it, and by 1970, the Women's Talent Corps, as Vinton told you, had turned into the College for Human Services, which was accredited by New York State with a 2-year associate degree program, and we were ready to go. But Audrey was not. She was not satisfied with that. She wanted to develop a new kind of education, and she actually wanted to use her experience as a social entrepreneur. She wanted to teach students to do what she had done, to be the kind of person that she had, and I agree that it's not entirely solve the problems. I've always said that students should look for opportunities to make an improvement. And I think I think that's an important issue, actually. So Audrey decided she was going to create a new kind of education. It would teach people to as Sam says, make a better world. It would teach people to use their knowledge. She wanted to do a performance-based education that would combine a balance of experience in the field of actually bringing about change, combined with academic studies. In order to do this, she went about it the way she ordinarily went about creating a new organization. She started by intensive research. She got a big government grant, and that's about when I arrived at the college. I worked on that grant, and we got it, and it allowed Audrey to close the college for a year, and no more students. The faculty became a research and development group, and their charge was to develop a group of competencies to be the basis of this performance-based program. The competencies would be the things that people need to be able to know and do to be effective in service positions. And Audrey was not thinking of human service as a particular profession. She was thinking of it as a very broad profession underlying any kind of service work. So this research, she also hired a large group of consultants. The research and development group set to work and developed about 14 competencies. And that was fine. What next? It wasn't clear. The most important of the consultants that we had was McBurr & Company in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which was a well-known, that is a prestigious research organization. And the most important thing about their work was they were supposed to define qualities of outstanding professionals. We had identified those professionals, a large number of them. It seems to me there were about 60 of them. And Audrey wanted them to define the qualities that these people had in common. The important thing for us was that these qualities correlated with the competencies that our research and development people had come up with. It was about this point that people began to realize that we were really talking about two kinds of competencies. We were talking about two groups of competencies, and that became the basis for the program, as I think we can foresee. And that was pretty much the history of the development up to that point. What resulted was a system of education, and I want to describe purpose-centered education as a system, meaning a structure with parts that work together in some predictable way. And this is what Tom has been talking about, of course. The first group of competencies we decided were functional competencies. These are functions or roles that professionals play. Incidentally, these competencies are different for different programs very often. They are specific to the program. The functional competencies are functions or roles. They are kind of standalone competencies. You can address them one by one, and that's what we did. We called them purposes and decided that students, that each semester would be focused around one of these competencies. The second group of competencies were generic competencies. These are competencies that are always in play. And the reason I want to talk about them now is because I think the concept of the dimensions is very hard to understand, and I want to try to explain how pervasive it is. They are dimensions of performance, they are dimensions of knowledge, they have different meanings, and the easiest way for me to understand that is to think of them as competencies, generic competencies. And these are competencies that students need to develop over time from the beginning of the program to the end. And so we had Audrey decreed, in fact, she saw this as a great breakthrough, that in each semester students would have a class in one of these competencies, and they would build on them from semester to semester. Now, these competencies, which students continue to address, once they have made them a part of their practice, they have learned to set themselves worthwhile goals and to achieve them in a systematic way. They have learned to pay attention to the values of the people they are working with and their own values, and to see the value issues they have to deal with. They look at the values of the systems they have to deal with, and they, of course, have to cope with value differences. And they are, at the same time, looking at ethical codes and learning about the ethical codes they have to deal with. They are learning, those are the first two of the 5 generic competencies. The third one, of course, is self and others, which means students are going to identify the stakeholders in any situation and try to understand what they bring to the situation, what abilities they have, what their interests are, how the students need to consider them, and what kind of relationships they should be building with them. To me, this is very important as for the business program, because I think there is a tendency in the business program to emphasize the 4th dimension, which is systems. And of course, everything can be analyzed as a system, and people can be analyzed as a system, but looking at people as people and developing relationships with them is something different. At any rate, our students, for the 4th competency, they learn to analyze systems and figure out how they're going to deal with systems and make them work for them and avoid the constraints that systems can impose. And the 5th competency, the 5th of the generic competencies, is skills. Students must learn to look at the skills they have, the skills they need, how they are developing them, and so on. Now, I've gone into the dimensions at some length. The 3rd component of our purpose-centered education, as Tom has said, is the constructive action, which is really the linchpin of the whole program, and brings together the purposes and the dimensions in some kind of action, and students bring their competencies together in the field in an effort to accomplish something worthwhile. We have a method for doing the constructive action, which is quite detailed. It is students follow it, and as you know, in a documentation, which keeps them on track through every stage of the constructive action. But as they do the constructive action, they use the dimensions to help them get a broad and comprehensive view of what they're doing. They look at their purpose and say, am I clear about what my goal is? Am I on track to achieve it, or have I gone astray somewhere? Or do I have to change my goal? they look at the values of the people they are dealing with, and are they recognizing value issues? Are they dealing with them? Or are they just allowing differences of opinion to muck up the works without really understanding what's happening? Are they paying attention to all of the stakeholders? Do they understand their role? Are they paying attention to their needs? Are they addressing what needs to be done for those people, with their interests, what their interests are? This is so important in a business program. I think it's not sufficiently recognized how important it is to learn about the relations, to be aware of the relations you are establishing with your co-workers, with your customers, and so on. And so we make that a concentration in our curriculum. They check on the systems that they're dealing with. Do they understand them? Do they understand how they work? Do they know what they need to know about those systems? And are they using the skills they need? Are they developing the skills they need? So as they go through the constructive action, they are guided all the way along. They ask again and again at every stage. They ask themselves questions. The dimensions inspire questions that keep them on track as they perform the construction and give them a broad view of what it is they're trying to do. Now, I think there's some disagreement about the dimensions as the basis for classes. I don't know if there's another way to deal with them, but I must say I think it's terribly important to understand how they can help students to proceed in a complicated situation, to really get a comprehensive understanding of the world around them. In their classes, which Audrey said would be organized around the dimensions, their classes presumably are providing the essential knowledge that they need to organize their constructive action in this way. I want to just read to you an example of the dimension classes from the third semester of our original human service program, because I think it might be useful for you to have an example from a program that has been doing this for a long time and has really developed some skill at doing it, I think. The purpose for the third semester is to empower people through work in groups. In a values and ethics course called Group Values, Norms, and Morality, students learn about the social context for the formation of values and norms. In their Self and Others class, they study social and developmental psychology, learning about models of group interaction and the influence of family and other primary groups on the formation of patterns of group interaction. In a systems class called the Sociology of Group Behavior, they study ethnic and racial relations from an American and global perspective, intergroup conflict, and racism and discrimination. In skills, they have an introductory statistics course focused on statistics for group analysis. The purpose class helps students to plan and manage and document their CA and to integrate theory from the other dimension classes into it. There is emphasis on analytical and communication skills. So this is how the set of functional competencies and the 5 generic competencies and the constructive action work together with the purpose-centered system of education. This is the tradition you have to draw on in designing your programs and teaching them. So I guess it's time for questions.
I think Humphrey's going to talk.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, Humphrey. Humphrey, you
I need to hear much more. Please excuse me for my voice. I don't have much of it. I just want to make a couple of comments and allow the questions. questions. I know Toloki is going to come and make some closing remarks. I was particularly impressed as a young kid coming to Metropolitan College. One of the first things that struck me was that I was required every Friday to come and meet with the team that I was assigned to. And as Deborah and Tom has described, and it was only the School for Human Services, and so the 8 purposes were divided into 3 organizational components for the purposes of delivering what we're doing. So there was a group that was responsible for the first semester, and a group of teachers responsible for purposes 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then a group of teachers that were responsible for purposes 6, 7, and 8. And so we met every Friday. And the purpose of those meetings was essentially to address Tom's 3 points. And that had to do with principally about integration. We needed to talk amongst ourselves about what it is that we were doing in our dimension classes and how did it relate to that particular purpose and how we could best deliver that for the benefit of our students. That is how the idea that Tom described, it became practice in our mind's eye. And it allowed me as a young professor to understand what my colleagues were doing, what I was doing in a relationship to that particular purpose. The benefit of that was that students got a very concentrated approach to whatever that purpose was. I thought that that was particularly important for what we are doing. Just want to make it very short. Then Tom, in his 3rd element, talked about empowerment. And when I came here, the rave of the college was citizen empowerment. A lot of people didn't like the idea of citizen empowerment because they sounded very radical. I remember that there came a time in the college, and this came about when the School for Business was emerging, that there was a very heated debate amongst the faculty in the School for Business and Human Services over language in the mission statement. And it centered around the whole issue of social justice. And many business faculty didn't believe that there was a place for such language in a business community. And it was ironic that this debate was taking place at the time when Ivan Boesky was running rampant in Wall Street. And many business schools were being challenged to rethink what they were doing, to ask the question about, wasn't there some kind of social responsibility that was required of people working on Wall Street? It couldn't be barbarians at the gates. That there had to be some responsibility. And so we see that a lot even today. And so I'm a firm disciple, and I embrace Tom's view that that is who we said we were, and we should never have run from it as we did. Finally, I had the pleasure of working with Audrey for a very, very long time, and I hope that what I say now in my final closing remarks don't come off as being, what she said is radical and embracing that. Audrey had the view that we were delivering a new paradigm of education. It was different. If you wanted to be a real player in delivering in a new model, one had to come and uncloak oneself from whatever traditional trappings that you had come from. This is our fundamental challenge, that almost all of us in this classroom, we come out of traditional institutions. And the comfort level is for us to teach and to do things out of where we come from. But that is not our model. And so the challenge is for us to find ways of embracing the wealth of knowledge that we bring from traditional institutions and channel it into what we call purpose-centered education. That is our greatest challenge. There is some language in one of Audrey's writings that made some very strident remarks that, and I'm paraphrasing it now, that said something to the effect that, you know, if you know that you don't like what we do, at least acknowledge it, separate yourself from the college so that we can find other people who see a vision in what we do and therefore want to be a part of us. But it is equally coercive if you have someone here who genuinely don't believe in what my colleagues have described, but yet want to maintain a position in the institution. And so I want to encourage my colleagues in the School of Business to believe that this is an exciting way of delivering to students knowledge and information that can make them responsible in the societies in which they live, but that can also allow them to integrate theory and practice in a way that is centered and that is focused. And that is my overall general remarks. I'd be happy to talk more about the details of the three legs that Tom described, the relevance of dimensions to the purpose, and then how all of these purposes together make up a whole. That was my understanding when I came as a kid. That when I saw a student in Purpose 8, and we have lost for any number of reasons having to do with enrollment, sequentiality, but the old view was that when you see a student in Purpose 8, you should assume that they came now with a history of information and knowledge that was gained through 7 consecutive purposes that now challenged them to become agents of change, and that they would have had all of the necessary antecedent information to be challenged to enter into the world as agents for change. I believe we can do the same kinds of things in our business school. So I'm going to stop there and ask Tuloki to come and talk about where he sees us going from there, and then to entertain some questions. No, just come and make it. And then the questions.
Well, first I'd like to say thank you for coming today and for starting a discussion that we started about 2 years, approximately 9 months ago when I first got here. And I don't have the benefit of Humphrey's enormous experience, nor Deborah and Tom. But I also want to say thanks to Deborah and Tom for being here and to share with us their knowledge and their perspective on purpose-centered education. And I think this is very useful for us to have as we continue to change and build the business program. I thank the President for giving us the flexibility to go forward and to implement changes and new things and try to get closer to the model. Now, let me talk a little bit about where we were, what we're doing, and where we're going. And this session here is particularly useful, and I've had the experience, the benefit of working with Tom and Deborah and the President for the last couple of months on another program that we're working on. So I got to see a little bit more of their perspective, and it's interesting. 2.5 years ago, when we first started, when I got here, we had to do something with the business program. We had to look at it, make sure that number one, we're doing the right things with our students, that we were actually delivering a business education, and that when our students leave here, that they are truly empowered with the notion that they can actually function in a business setting. So that, to me, was the first thing that we had to deal with. And we've made some changes in the undergraduate business program. We've made some changes in the graduate business program. And we wanted to make sure that students, when they leave, they understand the basic language of business, they understand the basic functions of business, and that they were truly empowered with knowledge that'll help them in a business setting. So that was our first priority was to say, you know, was the curriculum as it is, was it doing that? And I'm very grateful to have a faculty that I'm working with, the full-time faculty member who were open-minded, realized that we needed to make some change, and also everyone who's on board and understand the imperative, which is we've got to embrace purpose-centered education as much as we can. We cannot run away from the model. This is the mission of the college. This is what college is all about, and this is what I say all the time. The challenge for us, and it will be a challenge of how do we do that? How do we maintain the integrated whole? How do we make sure that it's a performance-based degree? How do we make sure that our students can function in the roles that they will assume in industry? Those will be the challenges as we take on the second role and reinvent ourselves and our programs for the benefit of our students. The challenge will be is to look at those dimensions and to say, okay, you know, these are the dimensions and how can we embrace them and how can we make sure that those cubes within the dimensions are actually satisfying what those purpose dimensions are. This to me is an ongoing process. It is not something that's going to happen overnight. We're still wrestling with the field experience. We haven't gotten there by no stretch of the imagination. But we've also had, as a business person, and my background is business, I come from corporate, I've only been in education in the last couple of years. We've got to also manage all of these with the challenges of enrollment, of other things, ACBSB accreditation, advisory board input, faculty input, you know. But under the umbrella of purpose-centered education. So we've got a lot to do. This was useful today for me as an education process. It's useful to hear the president's perspective. It's useful to have his support as we go along the next cycle of reinventing ourselves. It's not going, this is not a program that you're not going to change. We've got to change it. We've got to figure out, I don't know, I really don't know how we're going to get closer and address the field experience. There is no easy answer. So we all collectively will have to come up with a method of how we address that. You know, given the imperatives of accreditation, how do we make sure that the dimensions and there is truly an integrated whole? Given the imperative of 8 TB students, ability to benefit students, and state requirements that they have certain things in the very first 4 purposes, how do we make sure that we include that? Yeah. Given the imperatives that we want to make sure that our students can go anywhere and talk to business and understand that, how do we make sure we deliver that? And also, you know, we are very proud of the fact that our undergraduate students go elsewhere for graduate education, so we want to also make sure that we prepare them for that as well. We don't prepare them just for our graduate education, but for them to go on and do well elsewhere. So these are the challenges for me. This is, you know, I'm going to bring this back to us. The adjunct faculty have always had input in the reinventing and of the undergraduate and graduate curriculum. In fact, a lot more on the graduate curriculum. And the process that we use with that is that we open it up for continuous consultation using Moodle and technology. So we've got a lot to do. You know, I think that this was a wonderful experience. This is what we need to do. We probably should have more of these, talk a little bit more as we continue to reinvent ourselves. Because we can't accomplish all in 1.5 hours. I think now, and I don't want to also forget my good colleague on this side. He sat behind me, but let me tell you, his valuable input and his perspective on purpose-centered education is always useful as we move along that Dean Cook-Mill. I guess we're now going to open it up for some questions and comments.
Yes, I don't know why I'm being featured as the leader of this group. I think that you should be in charge of the questions at this point.
Okay. Yeah. So we have questions. Okay. Professor Vernon.
One of the things that really has concerned me as far as the constructive action is concerned is that it's not always possible for the student to proceed from one directly to the other. So the kind of ladder concept or the scaffolding concept that we talked about sometimes is somewhat fractured because there are times when, for example, you find a student who's doing purpose 2, but they're also doing some classes in purpose 4. So I think that is a concern. My other concern is that I think that students who have gone through the system and who are, who have found their way within, as far as jobs, etc. are concerned. And I know from my own students that quite a few of them are doing very well. But I don't know if we've been tracking them because I think that some of the things that we are doing, they can, sort of be of some help to us, whether it's to, where they're working to sort of assist a lot of the students so that when they're doing constructive action, it's a real-world experience. Because sometimes students are not working, and therefore they can't always sort of use whatever they're doing in constructive action as a real-world experience. And I know that there are times when I've sometimes had to come up with case studies for some of these students. So I've been tracking our students, trying to find out, have a sort of where are you today, sort of a situation where if you've taught some students, they're somewhere, if you can somehow figure out a way to, and I'm sure maybe based on your records, if you can figure out where they are, and get them to sort of become part of this. I think that this is the whole idea of having alumni. This is the whole idea of having, sort of a pool of people that you can, sort of utilize. Sorry.
I'm going to let Taloki respond, but the first part of your question is such an important one. Because if you remember in the President's opening remarks, he talked about how in the early days, all of our students were being paid in a sense to go to school. So we had the assurance of the completeness of a particular purpose. Now with the advent of transfer credit and a number of other dynamic factors, we have what you are describing, that a student can have what I call bifurcated purposes, and they're two different purposes at the same time. That presents some unique problems for the integrity of the model.
I will also point out that in the early days, we in effect were paying the employees for the agencies. In this case, the agencies an extraordinary incentive to work hard with us and cooperate in carrying out the educational program.
So we're always, until the college has taken a policy that we're not going to accept any transfer students. And if the college were to take that policy, half of us in this room wouldn't be here because there wouldn't be a need for us. Probably 2/3 in the business program, because we do get a lot of transfer students, and we try. You'll probably hear me talk a lot about enrollment, and in our general faculty business meeting, it is an agenda item, and I ask everyone to help, because for us to do the things that we need to do to enhance purpose-centered education, we need to say, okay, we're now in a position where the programs are just doing really, really well, and we can afford ourselves the opportunity to step back now and say, the ideal world, what we want, because we have brought the enrollment levels to the level it needs to be. We're always going to have that problem. We're trying as much as possible to, over the last 2 years, we said what we will do, and Dr. Rosner is responsible for this, which is that, try to educate all of our faculty who are teaching CA classes, and also try to lend us support to students who need help in terms of the CA. This past semester, because Our CA classes were not entirely taught by full-time faculty because we didn't have that many. We took a conscious decision this semester to make sure that our faculty, full-time faculty member, were only teaching CA classes. So they're in here in all hours trying to make sure that the student understand that. In certain programs, we don't have that luxury on the graduate level. I see one of our program coordinators giving me that look because we don't have any full-time faculty program. But I'm aware of that. And this is a process. It's going to take us some time to get there. In terms of our business students and where they are and information like that, and what also support that they need for the CEA. You know, a couple of semesters ago, Dr. Yeager, the program coordinator for the General Management and Financial Services program, we actually surveyed all of our undergraduate students and all of our graduate students, and Dr. Duval, I think, was part of that process, where we wanted to know, do you need a field placement? Do you need a mentor? We went out and we asked the student this because we didn't have enough information to make that determination what more we needed to do to at least get that connection with the real world out there. And whether it was through an internship or a field placement or a mentor, we didn't know. So we're going to probably, Dr. Yeager may need to do another survey again so we can get some results. But interesting enough, the majority of our undergraduate students had a place where they could do their CAs. They were, in fact, in a working environment. Whether that working environment was where they could possibly do a CA, which was difficult. And I share the president's view on this, which is it's really tough to walk into a company and ask them to share data and information and ask them for our students to embark on things that normally is reserved for others to do. But there are ways of getting around that and ways to approach that. On the graduate level, a lot of our students, interesting enough, did not have a place for their field survey, their field work. But they also did not want to. They didn't get it because it's a little bit in interesting dynamics on the graduate level. So again, we have to go back to trying to figure out now, you know, how do we make sure that we satisfy minimally satisfy the requirements for presented education and the field component and the connection to the real world. And so the mentorship program was a big part of the redesign of the MBA program. Dr. Yeager, you want to add to that?
I think that the reality is that at the end of the day, the student is very conscious about their career perspective. And so I heard a lot of our graduate students, I don't know whether I'm answering the question directly, but a lot of graduate students get promoted during their course of MBA. And that's a good thing, all right? And they're happy about it. But on the other hand, there's always this desire, perhaps, to create a business on their own, right? And that is not necessarily, you know, work together with what they're doing on their job, which give them a paycheck, right? So I think that's why they feel that they do not need the field experience. Not that they don't think that it's important, but it's because they can't really use it in their own workplace, right? Because the dream and the workplace is, you know.
I don't really want to manipulate the conversation.
No, we haven't.
I think one of the things that if they're doing like purpose 2 and purpose 4, they should actually read the purpose manual or the purpose manual for purpose 2, purpose 3, and purpose 4.
And it's a requirement. We try, when students are coming into the program, we try not to give them any CAs. They have to go through the entire CA process, all 8 purposes. So because, as Tom and Deborah indicated, you know, it's a building block. So and we want to maintain that, and it was designed, you know, on the undergraduate level to build on each other. We have 2 comments here, Dr. Rosner and then Dr. Bajwa.
I just wanted to say, I thought that in some sense, at least that the CA and business go together fairly well, because business, the settings are out there, they're not in here, any kind of business, right? And you can't learn about business in the classroom only. just like teaching. I mean, you can go to graduate seminars on esoteric subjects, but until you're in front of a classroom, it's a whole different ballgame. So I think, business is pretty much sort of like that. Many of our students, many of them are interested in starting their own business. I noticed that. And it might be because of some of them feel disenfranchised on some level, maybe are skeptical about the corporate world and how they'd succeed in it. But I do think that a lot of them do want to start their own business, and that's also a very good setting for the constructive action. And it gets them to start thinking about what they want to do. So I think, business, just because there's a profit motive in it, doesn't mean that we need to be skeptical as to, whether it fits in, And I think another thing I just wanted to say also, and this is, that when this college was founded, though, in the 60s and 70s, I don't know this for sure, but I would venture to say that the New York City public schools probably taught them better than they're teaching them now. And one problem that I face, and I know many of my colleagues also face, is, it's hard to change the world when you can't write that well, or when you can't, do basic math. And I think that's part of the problem too, because, it's something that we got to deal with. We got to teach them some basic stuff before they really, you can't put the cart before the horse either. So I think that's something we also face here. It may have to do with market factors, admissions, all sorts of things, but a lot of the students that we get aren't ready yet to change the world. They need to change, fix themselves a little bit and get, unfortunately.
I want to assure you that writing has always been a problem.
Tom, you were an instructor.
Remember that the original students, we had 100 of them, all had to meet the economic criteria that Minton talked about. I had students in my classes that were probably functionally illiterate when they came to us. So it's definitely an issue. But I think the idea of empowerment, if you can really get a student to start taking control of their education, that spurs them to learn to read, to do all the work that they need to do. They start realizing the gap between where we think they could be and where they are at the moment. That's why if you talk about it,
right, because there does seem somewhat of a gap, that we're talking about the curriculum, we're doing this, and we're sort of tweaking the curriculum. Sometimes I think, well, what are we actually dealing with when we're in front of the classroom? It's a whole other, it's reality check, So it's something I think needs to be,
And I want to say the other thing is that I found in human service work that sometimes the students that were the best, highest academic levels were not necessarily the best change agents out in the community. That there's some qualities that some of our folks had that are really make them fantastic human service workers. And maybe similar qualities in business that aren't all based on academic skills, but personal qualities, and interactional relationships, etc.
I have to add to these two comments the fact that we exist in a national situation now where there's a good deal of skepticism about the skills level of college graduates, and particularly about the skill level of minority college graduates. And we owe it both to ourselves institutionally and students to pay close attention to trying to get those skills up to at least acceptable levels for people who are leaving with degrees, and we will be under more and more pressure to demonstrate in some tangible way that we're succeeding in that. And that will be inescapable. And to say that, well, they're innumerate and illiterate, but they're really great change agents is not going to cut the mustard in the national discussion.
Dr. Bashi, we had a question?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said for the business, for the healthcare. Majority of our healthcare students, 60 out of almost 75, are transfer students from the associate degree colleges and come from varied background. Some have typical clinical background, some have typical medical office administration background, some have health information technology background, and some have business program, and even some have social science. So to complete the degree, they have to pick and choose the courses which they have not taken. Since we don't give them transfer for CAs, everybody has to go to those CAs. So I was told by the students services that the students cannot take more than one CA at a time, and we will have a problem in completion of the degree program if we do that. Advantage is that most of them are working in healthcare services. They can do CAs at their own place where they are working. The disadvantage is they can't complete all of them in 2 semesters.
That's something that we will address, because I think, that's not an issue that student services they can advise us on, but that's an academic issue that we as faculty can deal with and find a solution.
Let me tell you an anecdote about Audrey and transfer students, and that is, at one point in time, I am told by Steve Lenhart, Audrey was adamantly opposed to accepting transfer students because they posed a serious challenge to the integrity of our curriculum. Audrey changed her mind on that question when it became clear that it was necessary to the financial health and well-being of the college, and due to changing circumstances in society and how people did their educations to take transfer students, and relented. That doesn't make the problems go away. These are problems that exist in every 4-year institution that takes transfer students. Every 4-year institution has an integral education program that they're proud of, they spend a lot of time putting together, and which is undone to some extent by taking transfer students. This led to incredible tensions in the last year in CUNY, where the central system essentially overruled the faculty and said the 4-year colleges will take transfer students from the 2-year colleges. AAUP is now investigating CUNY for violating governance standards on this question. But whatever the merits of that might be, the tensions are extremely real. I think in our circumstance, where we have a highly integrated and very unusual curriculum, the tensions are even greater than at an ordinary 4-year college, and that this is to some degree inescapable. What we have to do is think about ways to do it practically. One thing I'm sure we can't do is say you have to do every constructive action. You can only do 1 per semester. So no matter when you transfer in, you're looking down the road at 7 or 8 semesters of constructive actions. That will not work. That is not convenience.
And just one other anecdotal note to go with what the president said. When I came to the college, and Deborah and Tom remember this, students didn't get letter grades. They got O for outstanding, S for satisfactory, and I don't think it was one other grade. Well, that went by, I know you. And that went by the wayside. The students wanted to have transfer credit to take to other institutions, and it all meant nothing to the next institution that they were going to, and the U meant nothing. And so we had to, to readdress that issue to reflect what the realities are in the marketplace.
So we have one comment, yeah, and then perfect. So
I'm sure this has been discussed, but I just wanted to bring up again the idea of students who are not currently employed and how that affect the CA. And the second part of that is there a mandated purpose where students have to have an internship or have some kind of employment that is, the school requires? Because at some point, there's going to have to be a choice.
Students who are unemployed, we encourage to do an internship, because it's also for,
By which purpose?
It's not mandated,
okay,
but it's tied to the constructive action. Because if we mandate it, that means that you have to also find them the internships. But we encourage the students to actually seek and work with student career services. We have a career services office to help them find an internship. I think we need to start looking in the undergraduate level. We need to have that discussion now. Do we mandate maybe a couple of internships, 1 or 2 or whatever that is? But that's going to we have to have that discussion. I agree with you. But we also introduced the concept of a mentor for students to help them, someone who's highly qualified, approved by the CA instructor, who can help them guide them through the CA process. That at least will give them the connection to some real person, real work, who have done that. So if a student is doing something in web design, that person has to be qualified in web design.
Yeah,
with a social
that challenge a lot during my classes. I'm currently teaching Purpose 2 CA,
right,
and many of my students are unemployed. And
right,
the topic is working in groups at the workplace.
The group project there should be, let's collectively coach each other to try to find employment.
I try to guide them to other areas of their life where they can identify group work.
Let's say my understanding of the fundamentals of Audrey's conception of education is that the crucial aspect was having an encounter with a reality external to the institution. That is an irreducible aspect of the educational system as we describe it. And somehow we have to get there in the experience of every student.
Professor Velasco, who's also the coordinator of the media management, well, you guys remember her.
There have been consistent comments from students that I have in CA in all three of the graduate purposes, but particularly more in the last two purposes since we've been rolling out the new curriculum about an entrepreneurial center or an incubator, because they feel like they've done so much work on their own business or they're doing work and they need some type of active business guidance. Now, in the media program, I've been twisted onto some of my adjuncts, like Professor Jackson, to essentially be providing those types of services. But at a point, he's going to get burned out and not be able to handle some of that, or the other professors. Has that ever been considered for the business program?
We've talked about an entrepreneurial center because it could actually be a place. It's an incubator, and it's also a way of bringing in the community into the college in a very real way, so students are connected in a very real way. And also, dealing with students who don't have jobs, that could be a place where we could address some of those issues, get them to work with real entrepreneurs. We have, I know, we've created a framework. We have a concept paper. We've floated that around to the president only recently, so let me make that clear. We sent that to him only recently. But it is something that we've talked about at the strategic planning meeting for the business faculty, that was highly endorsed, that we should look at the next degree for the business program is something in entrepreneurship tied to an entrepreneurial center here on campus. And that could help us in a number of ways.
And as a follow-up, because the students have approached you, the graduates say that it's kind of strange to them that we emphasize constructive action to get them to start these businesses and then don't support them when they leave. So it's like, well, what do they do? Those are the comments that we've gotten back from some of the graduates.
And you're absolutely right, because, while we expect a lot of our students, we don't expect that they're going to leave us here with a business established and sustaining itself for them. So you're right, there should be some kind of continuity and support for them, and that entrepreneurial center should be that place. So, and I think it was brought up at our last meeting as well, that's something that we should look at. And there are some funding. Some people have approached us to fund it. Some partners have been identified. So we'll see how it goes. I don't think that the funding might be there now, but but at least the partners are there. So, anyway, I think it's now 6, and I know some of you have classes, and there are some classes that are coming into this room. Unless there are any other questions for Ms. Allen, Dr. Weber, and the President, and Dean Crookendale, or any final comments, or would you like to say any?
I'd just like to say thank you, and I think as a board member, I think a dialogue is really what we need to have, and we're open to really figuring this all out together, not impose answers, as we certainly don't have them.
Nothing else has become clear. It's that we don't know exactly how to solve this issue, but I hope we at least frame the issues in ways that are clearer to people leaving than they were coming in, if nothing else today, and give you food for thought and give you the opportunity to get back to us with your creative observations or ideas on these issues.
Deborah, say anything else?
Oh, well, I want to thank you for being here, and one thing that pleases me very much is that the President and these two gentlemen, the Dean and the Director of Business Programs, are very much with purpose-centered education and ready to move it forward, and I find this exciting. And from your attendance here, I think perhaps this is true of you too. I think you have a great challenge and are ready to work on it. That delights me.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.